Hey there. Ready to kind of flip the script on how we think about energy?
I'm ready.
We're diving deep into alternative energy today, and honestly, it's a topic that feels more urgent than ever, you know?
Absolutely.
You sent over this really interesting social studies resource, and it's got me thinking, like, with all the cool new energy tech out there, could we actually, like, ditch fossil fuels completely? What do you think?
It's a big question, right?
Hmm.
And this resource, it really gets into the why behind that
Yeah.
like really urgent need to shift away from traditional energy to, well, to fight global warming. It's not just, keeping the lights on anymore. It's about making sure we even have a livable planet, for future generations.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's the defining issue of our time, really. So, like, what are some of the, I guess, contenders, the alternatives that are vying to power the future, according to this resource?
Well, they start with a familiar one, the sun. But what I thought was really interesting is how they break down solar power into three different types, actually.
Oh,
Active, passive, and then photovoltaic cells.
huh. See, I would have just lumped that all into like solar panels. You got your panels, soak up some rays, good to go, right?
Right, right. And it's easy to think of it that way, but there are these important distinctions.
Okay, so walk me through it. What are the differences?
Let's start with active solar power because that's
Yeah.
probably what most people picture, right? So like solar panels heating water for your house or your pool, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
And the good news is it's getting more popular and importantly, more affordable.
That's good to hear, yeah. Plus, no emissions, right? We're talking clean energy.
Exactly, clean energy. But, and there's always the sun, well, it doesn't shine 2047.
Sadly, yeah.
So it can reduce our, reliance on fossil fuels, but can't replace them entirely yet. At least not without some pretty big advances in how we store energy.
Okay, so active solar has its limitations. What about, you said passive solar?
Yeah, passive solar. Now, this is interesting because it's been around forever. We're talking like centuries.
Hmm.
It's harnessing the sun's energy naturally.
Okay.
Think like big south-facing windows that let the sunlight in to heat the building. Simple,
Well, elegant, even.
right? And the best part, free.
Can't argue with free.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But again, it's reliant on sunny days,
Right.
cloudy weather, short winter days, that kind of thing. It's going to impact how effective it is.
Makes sense. Okay, so solar power, lots of potential, but still depends on what Mother Nature decides to do.
Basically, yeah.
What about this third kind, what was it, photovoltaic cell?
Yes. Photovoltaic cells, those are really cool.
Those sound a little complicated.
They are a bit more complex, but they convert sunlight directly into electricity. No heating water or anything like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, so your solar-powered calculator, that uses photovoltaic cells.
Huh. Okay.
And here's a fun fact.
Right.
They're actually what powers those remote research stations in Antarctica.
No way, Antarctica. Seriously. That's wild.
Yeah, because other energy sources are pretty much impossible there. But it does highlight that while amazing, they do have drawbacks.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the catch?
Well, they can be expensive to produce, and they're not quite as efficient as some other renewables,
Hmm.
especially for like large-scale energy production.
Right, so maybe not powering entire cities just yet,
Not quite yet.
but definitely a niche for those situations where, you know, traditional power isn't really an option.
Yeah, it's all about finding the right tool for the job or the right energy source, I guess.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about solar, but we can't talk about alternative energy without talking about wind power. I'm curious what this resource has to say about that.
It's interesting. They actually start with a bit of history, how windmills have been used for centuries,
Okay. Yeah.
but they pretty quickly shift to modern wind turbine technology.
Which is definitely more what I'm picturing when I think about wind power. Those massive turbines you see like everywhere now.
Oh, right, exactly.
Yeah. Though there was this one thing in the resource that I thought was a really interesting way to put it. They called it the Goldilocks challenge.
Oh, right, yeah. That's a great way to put it. So basically, wind turbines need wind that's strong enough to generate power, obviously. But it can't be so strong that it damages the equipment.
Right, that makes sense.
So finding those locations with like the perfect amount of wind is key for energy output
Mhm.
and to make sure the turbines actually last.
It's all about that sweet spot. Speaking of sweet spots, are there any wind farms near you?
Hmm. Not super close to me, no. But the resource, it does mention a few places that are supposed to be good for wind power, like St. Lawrence, Formuse, and Ramea. Have you heard of those?
I have, yeah.
Those are supposed to be like prime wind farm locations because of geography and all that.
It's all about location, location, location.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered solar and wind, two very visible forms of alternative energy. What about some of the less obvious ones? What else is on the menu for powering the future?
Well, we've talked about the sun and the wind, but this resource, it also digs into something a little more down to earth.
Okay.
Geothermal energy, tapping into the Earth's own heat to generate power.
Now that's thinking outside the box.
Hmm.
Or should I say inside the
All
Earth?
right.
I'll be honest, my geothermal knowledge is pretty limited. It's got something to do with volcanoes, right?
Yeah, well, you're on the right track. They actually give the example of Iceland in here,
Oh, yeah.
which,
Oh,
volcanoes,
Lakeland, yeah.
they've really embraced geothermal there, using it to heat their homes, power their industries, even generate electricity. It's pretty amazing.
Wow, that's wild. Though I guess not every country has that level of volcanic activity just lying around. Does that mean geothermal's off the table for the rest of us?
Not at all. The resource talks about how we can also tap into heat from groundwater.
Okay.
So imagine this. Pumping hot water up from deep underground, we extract the heat for energy, and then the cooled water gets pumped back down. It's a closed loop.
Oh, interesting. So no volcanic eruptions required for that method. That makes it seem a lot more accessible. What about the environmental impact, though? Any downsides there?
That's one of the best parts. Geothermal, when done right, is really clean. No fossil fuels, no greenhouse gases. It's a win for the environment. Plus, and they make a good point about this in the resource, geothermal plants, they actually have a really small footprint compared to something like a wind farm or a solar array.
Oh,
It's mostly just wires and pipes.
so less intrusive visually and less impact on the surrounding environment. That's great. Are there any challenges with geothermal, or is this starting to sound too good to be true?
Well, no energy source is perfect. They do point out the upfront costs can be a big hurdle.
Right.
Drilling deep into the earth, building the infrastructure to harness all that heat, it's a serious investment.
Yeah, I imagine so. So maybe not something you can easily set up in your backyard.
Right.
But it sounds like, big picture, geothermal could be huge for the future of energy.
Oh, absolutely. It's clean, it's renewable, it's incredibly powerful, and it's literally right under our feet.
Amazing. Okay, so we've got the sun, we've got the wind, we've got the Earth's heat all working for us. What other surprising sources does this resource explore?
Okay, get ready for this. We're talking about power from plants.
Power from plants. Hold on, I'm intrigued. I'm picturing like solar panels on sunflowers or something.
Not quite, although that's a fun image. Have you ever heard of ethanol?
Ethanol. Yeah, it rings a bell. Something to do with cars, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. The resource explains that ethanol is actually a type of alcohol that we can make from plant matter. Corn is the most common source here,
Okay.
and it's often blended with gasoline. And get this, it actually helps to reduce CO2 emissions.
So it's like a greener type of fuel. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
Are there any other perks to using ethanol, or is it mainly an emissions thing?
It's more than just emissions. The resource highlights a few other big advantages. First of all, it's renewable. We can grow more corn, which means more ethanol. It's a cycle. It's also readily available, and this is a big one, it's cost effective.
Cost effective is always good to hear, but there's got to be a catch, right? We've learned by now there's no such thing as a perfect energy source.
You're right, and the resource does bring up a bit of a dilemma. It's the impact on corn prices.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, as we use more corn for fuel, it can actually drive up the price of corn for other things, like food, for example. It's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah, it really highlights how everything's connected.
Exactly.
It's a good reminder that even with renewable energy, we have to think about the whole picture.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between the energy we need and using our resources responsibly.
Well said. Okay, so ethanol, promising alternative, but definitely some things to consider. What else does this resource have for us? You mentioned more curveballs.
Oh, yeah. Get ready for this one. We're talking power from garbage.
Hold on, power from garbage? Wait, are you serious? Like my leftover takeout containers and banana
Yeah,
peel?
we got it. The resource actually zeroes in on this gas called methane,
Methane.
which is a natural byproduct of, well, decomposing waste, garbage, manure, you name it. And turns out we can use it for energy.
That's wild. Okay, now I have to ask, how does that even work? Do we just plug a power cord into the landfill?
That would be something, wouldn't it?
Right.
Thankfully, it's a little more involved than that. They describe these things called digesters. They're these big sealed tanks that basically mimic decomposition, but much faster and in a very controlled way.
Oh, okay.
The digesters break down the waste, producing this biogas that we can use for heating, electricity, even fuel. It's fascinating.
That's incredible. Though, let's be real, there's going to be some challenges with, garbage.
You're telling me.
It's garbage for a reason.
Right. There's the obvious issue of, how do I put this delicately? The smell.
Right, of course.
Not exactly pleasant. And then on a more serious note, if there's hazardous stuff in the waste, we have to be really careful about harmful emissions.
Right, we don't want to create a new environmental problem while trying to solve another.
Exactly.
So, where does biogas fit in big picture? Is this a realistic alternative for the future?
The resource suggests that it could be especially useful for larger cities and towns
Oh, okay, yeah.
because they generate so much waste. Imagine turning all of that into a valuable energy source. That's a win-win for the environment and for
Yeah,
municipalities.
that's a great point. Turning a problem into a solution. I like it. It's amazing, isn't it? Like, we could be powering our cities with stuff that normally just ends up, well, in the landfill. Talk about a recycling revolution. But this resource, they don't stop at garbage. They dive into another really interesting alternative, hydrogen fuel cells. This is like next level stuff, pulling energy from the air. It
It,
sounds kind of wild.
it does sound a bit like science fiction, right? But the science behind it is solid. Basically, these fuel cells, they extract hydrogen from the air, and then through a chemical reaction with oxygen, they generate electricity.
So instead of plugging in your electric car to charge, you'd fill it up with hydrogen.
Exactly. The resource, it describes it kind of like a battery that you refuel instead of recharging. And the best part is, the only byproduct is water. No harmful emissions or anything.
Wow, that's incredible. Clean energy and no guilt about driving. Sign me up. But there's always a but, right? What's the catch with hydrogen fuel cells?
Well, as promising as they do face one big hurdle: cost. The resource really emphasizes that producing these cells on a large scale is still really expensive. It makes it hard to compete with, the energy sources we're already used to.
There it is again, that pesky price tag. It seems like cost is a recurring theme when we talk about switching to cleaner energy.
It's definitely a challenge, but it's also important to remember that with any new technology, things usually start out expensive. As research progresses and production ramps up, the price usually comes down.
That's true. Like,
Mm.
look at solar panels. They used to be so expensive, but now you see them everywhere.
Exactly. So, yeah, widespread hydrogen fuel cells might be a bit further down the road, but the potential is huge.
Totally agree. Okay, ready for our final alternative energy source. This one's for the ocean lovers out there. Tidal power.
Ah, yes. Harnessing the power of the tides, such a cool concept. It's been around for a while, but the technology is getting better all the time, which is what makes it more and more viable as an energy source.
So how does it actually work? Are we talking like underwater windmills?
Kind of. Imagine turbines, similar to wind turbines, but placed in areas with strong tides. As the tide flows in and out, those turbines spin and generate electricity.
It's amazing harnessing energy from something as constant as the tides. The resource mentions the Bay of Fundy. That's got to be a prime spot for tidal power, right?
Absolutely. The Bay of Fundy is famous for having some of the most dramatic tides in the world.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's the perfect spot to capture all that energy.
It's like Mother Nature just handed us this amazing opportunity. So, what are some of the benefits of tidal power? Besides the obvious, it's renewable, doesn't produce emissions.
Right, those are big ones. But one thing the resource points out is that tidal power is also incredibly predictable.
Oh, yeah, good point.
Unlike solar or wind, which can be a bit finicky depending on the weather, tides, they're on a schedule. We know exactly when they're coming and going. Makes it a lot easier to incorporate into the power grid.
That's a great point. You got to be able to rely on your energy source. Are there any downsides to tidal power, though?
Of course, there are always some challenges. The resource talks about how building these tidal power plants is no small feat.
Yeah, I bet.
It's a huge undertaking, expensive and complex. Plus, you always have to be mindful of the potential impact on, the ocean and the creatures that live there.
Right. We don't want to solve one environmental problem just to create another. It all comes back to that balance we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
Well, this has been amazing. We've covered so much ground today, from the power of the sun, the wind, the earth's heat, to even using garbage and the ocean's tides to generate energy. It feels like we're on the cusp of a real energy revolution.
It is an exciting time, and I think what's so great about this resource is that it presents a balanced perspective. Yeah, there are challenges and costs and trade-offs to consider, but there's also enormous potential.
Couldn't agree more. It's not about just flipping a switch, it's about making informed choices as individuals and as a society, about thinking long term and taking responsibility for our energy future.
Absolutely.
So, to everyone listening, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you today? Which of these alternative energy sources really got you thinking? Let us know. We're all in this together, and these conversations are so important to have.